A welcome and a blessing in our tradition. We start off every meeting with a prayer and some good vibes.
Thank you, Linda. On behalf of the Habano Pomo Upper Lake Indian tribe, I'd like to welcome you to our casino. For those of you who haven't been here before, we hope you enjoy your stay. Before each meeting, we would like to do a prayer. And if I could have everybody stand. You can hear me in the back. We give thanks today to the meeting of the Blue Ribbon Committee. We welcome you with open arms. We ask our great Creator in the sky, the heavens, to bless this meeting, to exchange the views of everybody present. We ask that you protect our people, all of the tribal members, our guests today that are attending this meeting, and we ask also that you continue to give us good information, exchange your views, and to create a good world. We thank you for watching over our sick, our elders, and the weak. We thank you. Oh.
And now we're going to move to some opening comments before we get to introductions and the bill that led to the creation of this group, and also various money in the budget, which we will acknowledge later, is chiefly due to the assembly member from this area, Cecilia Curry, and I'd like to recognize her for opening comments.
Thank you, Secretary Laird, and all of you that are in attendance today. I want to thank all of you for being here today and making yourselves available to attend this inaugural meeting of the Blue Ribbon Committee for the Rehabilitation of Clear Lake. It means so much to me to see the work that we have started with AB 707 come to fruition. Thank you so much. I look forward to working with the California Natural Resources Agency, Lake County Board of Supervisors, Lake County Tribal Community, and all of the local stakeholders and community members to ensure that Clear Lake is clear. I have high hopes for what we can achieve through this platform. The purpose of this committee is to assess the environmental health of Clear Lake and to provide recommendations for revitalization of both the lake and the community and local economy. Whether the work of the committee establishes scientific record that Clear Lake is doing fine, or that we have work to do to protect and restore it, the goal is to provide proof, once and for all, that the lake is healthy, valuable linchpin for the local economy. I've always believed that when a community comes together, things get done, and this is our opportunity. I want to be clear that this process is a partnership. I put this committee together with different state, academic, and local stakeholders to collaborate toward one shared goal. We do not have time for conflict or egos here. With that being said, I want to thank you all once again for your time, your expertise, and dedication. I would like to also introduce Congressman Thompson, who has given his support to help us with this as well, and to also be the guy behind the scenes that I'm hoping that will help push this forward if we're working with our federal agencies. As you all know, Congressman Thompson, his heart and soul has been in this community for years, and he has been a great representative, and I'm honored that he wanted to be here today for this kickoff. Congressman?
Welcome.
Well, thank you, Assemblymember Aguilar Curry, and Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here, and thanks to all of the committee members who are giving their time to make sure that what the work that's done here is truly a success. I want to thank Cecilia. I just can't put in words how much you have brought to our community. You came up here, you introduced yourself to everyone, you took the time to learn about the issues, and you have been engaged like 150%. And it's really heartening. We have a beautiful area here. The lake is fantastic. We have the cleanest air in all 58 counties in California. Agriculture is just off the charts. The grapes that are being grown here are as good as any place else, and the wine is absolutely fantastic. Recreational opportunities are
I'm
abundant.
sorry we're not streaming so that people I'm sorry we're not streaming so everybody can appreciate the wine.
Well, we'll get to that. That's the next meeting. But the lake has been not only the center of everything that's good about our county, but it's also been a point of interest and concern for many. And for Cecilia to put together this commission and to bring together this many great people with the backing of academia to figure out the specifics and the reality of what we face in the county is so incredibly important. And I want you to know that I'm on board. Anything I can do, any federal resources that I can, we don't have earmarks, as you know, but any federal resources that I can bring to the table, I will do everything I possibly can. And Mr. Secretary, I'm glad that you're heading this up. The work that we've been able to do in the past has always been beneficial to everyone, and I'm sure we'll have the same outcome here. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. We appreciate you taking the time in a busy schedule to be here, and appreciate the partnership because it will be very important as we go forward. I wanted to, just before introductions, maybe frame how we got to this point and what we have to do so that it's clear going forward. And I think this meeting is really designed for everybody to get to know each other and to have an overview of everything that's in front of us, and then the future meetings will really be the hands-on, roll-up-your-sleeves, get-to-it meetings. And I think that I want to echo the thanks to Assemblymember Aguilar-Curry, because one of the elephants in the room is basically that people at the state level were flummoxed by the issue of the lake for a number of years and attempted a number of different ways to try to address the health of the lake. And it really was the combination of the efforts that the Assembly member did on this bill that really gets us to the point of bringing people together and focusing on what we actually can do. But in addition to funding for this committee, she, through the legislature and other legislators, and we are expecting Assemblymember Bloom here any minute, and he chairs in the Assembly the Resources Budget Subcommittee. So, and he happens to be from Santa Monica, so the fact that he wants to come to Lake County for a meeting is really significant. And you should all take him aside and thank him for that when we have our break. But money that has been secured in chief because of the Assembly member has been $5 million in voter-approved bonds from Proposition 68 for capital improvement projects, $2 million for multi-year scientific research with UC Davis, which is managed by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And she worked together with my staff to secure $15 million for a project for the restoration of Middle Creek. So that is, it's not just a bill, it's for the first time there are resources that are brought to the table to make it happen. AB 707 placed this committee under the purview of the Natural Resources Agency. And for those of you that don't know what the Natural Resources Agency is, although unfortunately some of you have been interacting with different of my departments in ways that you have preferred not to, we, under the leadership of a cabinet secretary and a cabinet agency, have 26 boards, commissions, departments, conservancies, but the biggest ones are CAL FIRE, the Department of Water Resources, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Energy Commission, the Conservation Corps, state parks, and we also have oceans, forests, all that, 19,000 people, almost $10 billion is under the purview of the Resources Agency. So I think that's why the Assembly member wished to nest this committee there, because it cuts across a lot of the different departments and issue areas of what we deal with. We are also at the center of delivering bond-funded projects, including Proposition 1 and Proposition 68, both of which provide funding for land restoration, acquisition, flood control, and other natural resources, infrastructure, and access projects. And within the Resources Agency, we have a number of ongoing activities around the state for ecosystem restoration and community development. For example, we released a 10-year management plan, also funded by bond funds, for the restoration of the Salton Sea, 48,000 acres of wetlands around the Salton Sea as it recedes. We also have the master plan for the restoration around the Los Angeles River and 51 miles around the Los Angeles River. And additional state resources have been identified for all these different plans. And so in passing AB 707 that established the committee, the legislature and the governor gave clear direction for the work of the committee in coming years, further supported by the ongoing funding that is contained in the budget. And specifically, the committee is to meet for the purposes of discussion, reviewing research planning, and providing oversight regarding the health of Clear Lake. Research conducted for the committee shall go through a scientific and applied science process. That is the specific wording that exists in the legislation. And the latter piece of this has already begun with the work funded through the Department of Fish and Wildlife with UC Davis. It's my vision for the committee that we build upon the countless hours of work and research that's already been done, much of it by members of this committee, to create a long-term plan that we can use to secure future funding for improvements to water quality, the overall lake health, including wildlife, and the surrounding communities. And the plan will be a living document that is created by the committee with input at all stages from the public and from other stakeholders. The one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that this has to be a realistic and practical plan. And I have to confess that when I sort of started this job almost 8 years ago, there was this plan for the Salton Sea that was going to cost between $9 billion and $17 billion, which was never going to happen. And part of the problem I had is setting aside what people thought was the bells and whistles plan that was never going to get funded to move to what we could actually do and what was realistic. And realistic also in terms of state, federal, and local funds, because they are limited. And your supervisor and other supervisors have reminded me regularly that Lake County does not have this incredibly large tax base that will take this on its own through the process, which is the reason state funds have been made available for this, to try to help and to try to move. So the challenge that this committee must meet is to overcome the practical and political barriers that any such effort inevitably faces to develop a plan that can ultimately be implemented. And one of the things, we have science at the heart of this. One of the, I marched in my local science march in Santa Cruz in April, and they were all chanting, what do we want? Science. When do we want it? Now. And then all the scientists shouted, with peer review afterwards. And while that's true, then that inevitably takes the process very long. And what we have to do, we know that there are issues with the lake. We know we have to address them before there's an economic downturn or something threatens the money. So we know we have to get to the end of the process at some point, and that is very important. There's a tendency to talk and talk and talk. We have to focus it, we have to bring the disparate groups together, we have to have a realistic plan that we can practically implement, we have to do it in a reasonable amount of time. So that is the challenge to this committee, and that is what I'm committed to do, although admittedly, the administration changes in 3 months. But we were determined to launch this, get the study launched, do everything before we left to make sure there's momentum that has been started by the legislation and the funding, that we keep moving, and that whoever walks in next sees that there's a process that's moving, that's working with everybody at the table, and will only want to put their efforts at continuing it and endorsing it. So that we know is part of the challenge. And so with that, I want to turn it over to each of the committee members to introduce themselves with their name and their affiliation. But we have been joined by Assembly Member Richard Bloom, and I already, before you walked in the room, acknowledged that you were chair of the Resources Committee and that you were from Santa Monica, and that everybody should thank you for coming to a meeting in Lake County. So I don't know if you have anything you would wish to add in terms of opening comments before we move to introductions.
Well, let me just thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here all the way from Santa Monica. And it's true, the fundamental reason that I'm here is because I chair the relevant budget subcommittee, and Secretary Laird, you just put your finger on it. We really can't accomplish anything without having some funding for it. I was here about 2 years ago at the invitation of then Assembly Member, now Senator Dodd, who wanted me to see this area. I frankly had not seen it since I was in my youth, but I remember it well from that time. This is an extraordinary natural resource. Both the lake and the watershed surrounding the lake are incredibly important resources for the state of California. And I want to thank Ms. Andrea Curry, my colleague, Assembly Member from this area, for bringing the legislation that brought you all together here so that we could focus your political, intellectual, and other energy on the very important issues that affect this region. And I pledge to you that I'll be with you every step of the way, and we will. It's always a difficult task finding money, but we will do everything we can to move an initiative forward to make sure that the needs of this area are met. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we're just going to literally go, naturally I look at the person that's drinking water. But we're just going to go around the table and indicate who we are and what our affiliation is so that people will know who are members of the committee.
Wilda Shaw, Lake County Economic Development Corporation.
Thank you.
Sarah Ryan with the Duke Valley Diploma Indians. Corolla Kennedy, Elam Indian Colony Environmental Director.
Jennifer LeVay, Central Valley Water Board.
Jim Steele, Lake County Board of Supervisors, District 3, and Board Chair.
Linda Rosas, Environmental Director for Hubby Middle Pueblo of Upper Lake.
Jan Coppinger, Lake County Special Districts Administrator.
Harry Lyons, President of Lake County Resource Conservation District.
Brenna Sullivan, Executive Director of the Lake County Farm Bureau.
Alex Tyler, the Environmental Director for Scotts Valley Indians.
Thank you very much. And I also just want to acknowledge that the Deputy Resources Secretary for Legislation, Caroline Godkin, is here and was also instrumental in help planning this meeting. And she is somebody that will monitor for me everything that goes on a day-to-day basis, so I want to acknowledge that. So we're going to move to the next item on the agenda, and part of the funding that was secured for this process has allowed us to bring on skilled facilitators from Sacramento State College of Continuing Education that will help facilitate this committee's work going forward. They're contracted with the Natural Resources Agency for a number of years, and as the administration in Sacramento changes, this Sacramento team will provide continuity to this process, which we thought was very important. So Dave Seplis and Sam McGill from Sacramento State will now provide an overview of their work.
Thank you, Secretary. I'm going to just move the microphone so I'm not down on my back completely to you all. I apologize for that. Very briefly, I'm just going to discuss a little bit about our organization, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sam. I am one of the directors of the organization. Some of you may know us by our former name of the Center for Collaborative Policy. By way of comparative example, we have worked regularly throughout the state on projects at a scale of, say, the California Water Plan. We have worked on numerous iterations of the Water Plan. We've worked on the California Trade and Transportation Plan. We are working regularly on the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and currently on the California Census. So in a facilitative capacity, working with diverse stakeholders, this is what we do literally for a living as third-party neutrals on high-level, multi-party, policy scale, landscape scale efforts to facilitate, be available to both ensure that the public has opportunities to be engaged and speak, to be making sure that you as committee members have an likewise equal opportunity to speak and work together. Clearly there will be a number of decisions to be made in the near future, a number of pieces of information to be brought. Our job is to be neutrals to help you along with that, but also to sort of be out of your way when we need to. I want to introduce the third member of our team who I sort of half jokingly, half not. The note taker in any one of these meetings is the hardest working person in the room. They quietly sit and scribe everything that you say. We are very blessed to have our colleague Sophie Courier-Mondel. So you will be seeing her as a regular part of this team. So
it's also where tremendous power resides.
Yes, indeed, that's true. You may be amazed what Sophie ascribes to you. So it's our honor to be a part of this and to be here helping you. Both Sam and I say this to you, the committee as well as the public, we have in the past, both in a facilitated capacity and in my background as both natural resources planning and facilitation, we've actually physically worked on technical activities and planning and watershed planning activities here at the basin. So we have what I like to call content fluency. We are not just kind of come in here and be sticky dot kind of people. We have embedded understanding, past experience in this basin, see a number of familiar faces. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague who will be the day-to-day facilitator of things. We'll all be part of the team. So.
Great, thanks, Dave. Can everyone hear me without the microphone? Microphone? Okay.
Oh, and you may want to, Secretary Laird, you may need to be a little closer to the microphone.
It's not very turned up. So if there's somebody that can turn it up,
All right, well, thank you all for being here. As Dave mentioned, my name is Sam McGill. I'm a senior facilitator with the Consensus and Collaboration Program with the Sacramento State College of Continuing Education. Trying to get that right. We're going through a title change right now, and hopefully I didn't stumble over it too much. Many of you I know from previous processes, either here in the Clear Lake area or throughout Lake County and the Central Valley in general. So it's a pleasure to see those that I know, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know all the committee members. My hope today is just to run through a very brief overview of our kind of conceptual approach right now for the way that some of the outreach, engagement, and facilitation for the committee may work. The one big caveat that I kind of want to assign to this is, at the end of the day, as Secretary Laird mentioned, the committee is under the Natural Resources Agency, but we're sort of here at your request. We're here to help you with the work that you do from day to day. And we're going to be touching base with you consistently throughout the entire process to make sure that it's achieving the goals that it was intended to. So this is very much a conceptual diagram that we've laid out here, and we shouldn't ascribe too much to it right now. The other thing I'll note is that all of the materials, including the summary that Sophie is going to be drafting up, will be posted to the Resources Agency website after the meeting. So if you do want to see any of this content afterwards, you certainly can. All right. To start with, just the approach that I'm going to run through, I'll touch briefly on kind of background review of how we got here and what some of our initial steps will be. But really the work starts after today as far as the outreach engagement from Sacramento State is concerned. I know that many of you have been involved in this for years and years, your entire careers in many cases. So we want to acknowledge all that work, and that's why we really we're starting out our work by looking at some of the materials that have already been developed that could impact the way the committee moves forward. After this, we also want to conduct in-depth interviews with members of the committee, and if you all think that it's appropriate, members of the broader community as well, to form what we call a stakeholder assessment. We'll talk a little bit about that. The outcomes of those interviews, and you all with all of your local knowledge, is going to be a committee charter and work plan. And that's really what we're going to use to drive the focus of this group moving forward, but it's going to be based directly on input that all of you provide. And then towards the end here, we'll touch base quickly on some of the immediate next steps. That could involve field visits, a tour of the basin, and then obviously the quarterly committee meetings that are laid out in the legislation itself, and potentially, at your request, if you think it's appropriate, maybe some subcommittee meetings as well to focus on the really specific information that you're all going to need to achieve the goals of the committee. Okay. I don't want to spend too much time on this and really leave it open to your questions. But to start with, we've been working very closely with Carolyn in particular, and I've spoken to, I think, every member of the committee either on the phone or by email now about some of your initial thoughts about how the committee should proceed. So we're going to continue conducting those sorts of meetings, and as I mentioned, review some of the past stakeholder engagement activities that have happened to make sure that we're not kind of reinventing the wheel or doing things that you've already kind of discussed to death. If there are things that haven't worked in terms of stakeholder engagement, we want to hear about that right out of the gate here, so that basically we're not wasting time at the end of the day. That's going to lead us to what I've been calling a stakeholder assessment. This is kind of a best practice for facilitators like Dave, myself, Sophie, and others in our line of work. What we say in these public meetings is wonderful, but we know that you all may have things that you want to share with us confidentially as well to help shape the way the committee works. So it's our hope that as soon as this meeting concludes, we can start scheduling some confidential interviews with all of you based around a very specific set of questions that we'll be developing in partnership with the Resources Agency over the next couple of weeks here, so that we can get your input on, again, things that will work and things that won't work moving forward for the committee and both broader engagement for the community in general. This provides kind of a snapshot of the way things are on the ground right now. We know that it needs to be updated throughout the process, and we're on hand to do that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be our best guess at sort of an initial set of common themes and recommendations that will help drive your work moving forward. Right. As I mentioned, our hope is that these recommendations lead to a specific committee charter. And oftentimes, I imagine most, if not all of you, have participated in boards or committees like this in the past. And work plans, charters, all of that sort of thing is hardly the most exciting part of the work that you're charged with. But knowing kind of the rules for engagement, the policy areas that you have purview to discuss, is really critical to lay those things out right at the start of a process like this. And we want to make sure that we can set up a charter that you can all agree to, and that'll really kind of, again, sort of move the process forward. It can always be updated, but we want to make sure that we're developing that right from the start. We also want to develop a work plan and schedule. We realize that there are a number of legislatively mandated deadlines. The first and foremost is an annual report that you all are charged with developing. The first one is due, I believe, on January 1st of 2019. So we want to make sure that deliverables like that are called out, that everybody knows what the schedule actually is, and that deadlines are realistic. We can kind of shoot for the moon on any number of major issues, but we want to make sure that the things you're discussing can be achieved in a reasonable amount of time, and that everybody's clear on exactly what those deadlines and assignments are. So that's sort of a couple of the initial activities that we'll be conducting on our end. But we also have a few ideas for kind of near-term next steps for all of you. One thing that I think I've spoken to all of the committee members about is this concept of field visits and the next round of meetings. I know that there's a variety of opinions on how effective visits like that might be, but in our experience, this is really a great opportunity for all of you to get to know each other on the actual lake itself, and as Dave has often said, kind of turn the dirt together to get outside and see what some of the problems are facing the basin firsthand. That's one concept that we're discussing. As I said, I know that there's a variety of different opinions on it, so we'll continue to work with all of you and see if that's a reasonable thing to do, likely in the November, December timeframe, or if we need to scrap it and just talk about some of the problems and just dive into your day-to-day work. At the end of the day, though, what we want to do is hear from you what some of the prioritized challenges might be from your perspective. That'll really feed into your work moving forward and make sure that we're on the same page what the issues are right out of the gate from your perspective. As I believe the Secretary mentioned, there's a second part of this that's really driven by research UC Davis is doing, and they'll speak about that momentarily here. There are a couple of things that are actually mandated in legislation as far as your work, and one of the big things is quarterly committee meetings. So we do expect, at a minimum of 4 meetings a year up here with all of you. 2 of those must be held in Lake County. We'll be working closely with all of you and resources staff to figure out the best locations, whether all 4 of them should be here, or whether we want to move around to different locations throughout the region. The important thing to note, though, is that because you all have been appointed by your various organizations and agencies, all of these quarterly meetings are subject to the Bag with the Keene Act. So that does tie our hands a little bit in terms of meeting noticing requirements, where meetings can be held, and that sort of thing. We can give a primer on the Act later for those that aren't really familiar with it, but the intent really is to make sure that all of the members of the public who are here are up to speed throughout the whole process on what you're doing. Your first major deliverable, and it's something that we need to discuss in depth at our next meeting and throughout subsequent conversations, is report to the governor on what you've been up to, what you've accomplished, and some of the challenges that you've sort of laid out for us. So, it's already the middle of October. We're going to be jumping into some of that very, very quickly here. I think all of you, members of the public and on the committee, are well aware that timelines can quickly slip. So it's our job to help you make sure that we meet all of this. All right. And the final slide that I wanted to go to sort of dovetails with that. Because we are, or you all, are required to only meet 4 times a year, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to happen behind the scenes as well. And one potential idea that we've come up with, this hasn't been, run to ground or anything, but potential subcommittee meetings that are really topic specific and can achieve some of the really small individual deliverables that will all feed into things like that annual report. Want to give everyone the opportunity, both committee members and members of the public, to ask any just kind of clarifying questions you have about the work that we're doing over the next few months. I know that was a lot of content to kind of race through, but at the end of the day, we want to hear from all of you more than anything else. So I'd look to members of the committee first and see if you have any questions for myself, Dave, or Sophie, and then open it up to any questions from.
Questions from members of the committee?
Yes.
It's related to the presentation. I guess just in terms of the process with the work that UC Davis is doing I have seen a draft scope of work for them. I don't think it's all final, but they're pulling together existing information about Clear Lake, the nutrient cycle, everything related to what we're trying to do. When are we expected to get that, and in terms of just the process throughout the time period that this committee is going to meet, when should we expect UC Davis's work to be submitted or provided to us so that we can continue?
Dave?
No, I was going to say, repeat. You may want to repeat the question because I don't know if the public is hearing it. So.
Yes, so the question was, another component of this overall process is research being conducted by UC Davis, and the question from Sarah Ryan was when we can expect kind of a final scope of work and when that research will be complete. Is that correct?
Yes, and also if the research is going to be, if they're going to be working with us kind of throughout the time period that the committee is meeting.
So kind of three-part question there, and I'll have to look to members of the UC Davis team to answer some of that. And I'm hoping, looking at some of those presenters, that you'll touch on it in your presentations that'll follow this. So if we can hold off on that, they'll speak to it in just a moment.
Other questions from committee members? Then questions from members of the public?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Will these meetings be streamed or recorded for later viewing, like people who can't attend in person?
That's something that I know we've discussed, and we'll have to talk to the Resources Agency, but it's certainly something that we could consider moving forward.
Other questions? Then, Sam, thank you very much, but even though there weren't other questions in this moment, we know there's a break, and there's other things that people could engage you if something comes up for them.
Great.
We're going to move to the next item on the agenda, which is the UC Davis team that was just mentioned. And as I laid out at the start of this meeting, one of the funding pieces was secured funding for $2 million, a multi-year research project at UC Davis under the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the detailed research will inform this committee. In a moment, we're going to hear from Dr. Jeff Shadow and Jonathan London on their work, but I thought I would add that one of the things that I have devoted an amazing amount of time, more than I thought I was going to have to, is to Lake Tahoe in the last 8 years. And we formed a science committee with Nevada to look at the science issues on both sides of the lake. But UC Davis had a historic program and done the historic measurements of Lake Clarity, even though now that Lake Tahoe is heating faster than any freshwater lake in the world, there are other elements of science that are entering into that. So sometimes people say it's not their first rodeo. I would say this is not their first lake. So I just wanted to, in introducing them, acknowledge the fact that they've played a role around California in science that is very similar to what they'll be doing here. So let me turn this item over to Jeff and to Jonathan.
And if you'll all bear with us for just a moment, we just need to switch over the presentations real quick.
Yeah, I should add that I was intimately involved in the science behind the Salton Sea options that produced the $7 to $15 million, where the lowest of those options was the do-nothing alternative. Even that had a tremendous price tag. So while we're just setting up the computer, I just wanted to acknowledge Dr. Paul Dodd. This is like a Clint Eastwood moment. There's an empty chair there. Dr. Paul Dodd's UC Davis's Associate Vice Chancellor for Research. He's very honored to be on the Blue Ribbon Committee. With the change of timing of this meeting, he unfortunately he's out of the country now. So I'm sure he'll be a regular participant in meetings going forward. No, let's be familiar here. Okay, and I also wanted to thank the Assemblywoman for engaging UC Davis at an early stage in this. We're all very excited to be involved. Is this working? This one? Yeah. Okay. UC Davis, we're looking at two aspects. I'm not sure where is the best place to start. Two aspects of this overall study. Our own team, my own team, my collaborators, Drs. Alex Forrest and Steve Sadro, who are there. And we're doing the work associated with the lake and the watershed, the physics, the chemistry, biology, and Dr. Jonathan London, his team, the Center for Regional Change, are looking at the economic and social impacts and options. So I'll just be talking about our part, and then Jonathan will be talking about the CRC's efforts. Okay, so a very quick outline of what I'll be talking about. A conceptual model of how Clear Lake works. This is not going to be a long, boring scientific talk. It'll be a very short, boring scientific talk. But it's really important I think, to understand that Clear Lake, although it's really shallow, is a very complex lake. And then talk about our intended work plan. This is, as was alluded to, a collaborative effort. We wrote a proposal to California Department of Fish and Wildlife that now forms part of the contract, that has deliverables, but we understood that there is a Blue Ribbon Committee that is going to be giving us input, and there are multiple stakeholders, both in the room and throughout the basin. So our intended work plan is pretty fluid at this stage. At the end of the day, we want to make sure we address everybody's needs and concerns, and the first part of this is understanding what those concerns are. Okay, so yeah, bold statement. Clear Lake is the most complicated lake in California. It has a whole range of legacy contaminants dating back to the middle of the last century. It's hypereutrophic, lots of nutrients, it's cyanobacteria. You're already under 2 TMDLs. Biological issues with native fish, invasive fish. For what I do, the physics of the lake, wind is an important factor, and you've got a stinking great volcano in the middle of the lake, which makes it really complicated and difficult to deal with. But again, from our point of view, it's interesting. It's a large lake, complex watershed that changed literally in the last 3 months with the fires. And it will continue to change in the future with new fires. The fact that it's shallow means the sediments are really close to all of the water all of the time. And the sediments are where all these contaminants and nutrients really reside most of the time. And so I introduced this phrase, thermal stratification. This is the boring part, so get ready. It varies here pretty much every day, every week. Lake Tahoe, summer begins, warm water's at the top, cold water's at the bottom. Interesting, boring. Here, warm water at the top, cold water at the bottom in summer, till there's a windy day, and then it's all mixed up and it starts again and again and again. You don't know what's going to happen almost day by day. So how Clear Lake works, a very quick primer. So this is some data going back from some work we did in the 1990s, and I should mention Tom Sikonic, also from UC Davis, is here. Tom was involved almost from the 1980s in a lot of the studies, and he's going to be part of our team, hopefully, trying to tap into his memory. So this is some data from instruments that are at different depths in the lake. So that what they're showing is temperature. So the pale blue one at the bottom is an instrument at the bottom of the lake, looks down 15 meters down. And the red one at the very top is one that's much closer to the surface, 2 meters down. And so at the beginning of that plot, where it says day 140, 142, they're all sort of pretty much the same, meaning the lakes are all mixed up. And then day 144, so this is middle of May, they spread apart. Bottom stays cold, so the top part gets warm. Mixing, the top stays where it is, the bottom suddenly gets no oxygen. The only way oxygen gets down there is because of this mixing. It's that pale blue line is separated in this lake because of all the organic matter that has come in over hundreds, thousands, millions of years. The bottom of the lake consumes that oxygen very quickly. In a matter of, we believe, days, that oxygen goes, and suddenly, chemically, it gets even more interesting. Nutrients come out of the bottom, mercury comes out of the bottom. Everything that's been put into the lake in the past has the potential to come out and become part of the water column. And then on day 154 at the end, it was a windy day, it all mixes, all these things leave the water column till the same thing happens again in 2 weeks. So that's the environment we're dealing with. I'm going to show you, this isn't going to take as long as you think, some model results that highlight just how complex it is. And those model results are for about 3.5 days in that circle period. That's coming up. So as I said, the stratification changes the amount of dissolved oxygen, and it allows for especially nutrients to come out of the bottom. Okay. It's like a Jerry Garcia concert, isn't it? So this is the Oaks Arm. So many of the people in the room are familiar with the Oaks Arm. To the right, that's down towards the mine site. To the left is up towards the Narrows. The wind has been blowing, and those colors are showing the warm water gets pushed down towards the mine site, and those arrows are showing the currents that are circulating. Okay. When the wind stops, which it inevitably does most nights, the whole lake relaxes. So then that red water at the right goes shooting back the other way, water comes in to take its place, and the net result of that is not as intuitive as you would imagine. Sorry to put my back. Okay, now we'll see if this is going to work. So this is the model part of it. This is the, pointing as if you can see. It's the Oaks Arm, where that red sort of bullseye thing is. That's where in the model we put some dye, if you will, some tracer. And that's put at the surface. It's also put at the surface on the right-hand plot. What I'm going to show you is water at a depth of 1.5 meters, 5 feet, where that goes in the subsequent 3.5 days. It's on the left, and on the right it will be water at 6.5 meters, about 20 feet. Now remember, there's a stratification in chemistry down at the bottom because we've had a loss of oxygen near the mine site. There's a high likelihood of methyl mercury, for example, being elevated in those bottom sediments. Well, that's not going to work, it seems, even though it was loaded and tested half an hour ago.
Just click right on.
Click which?
Just click right on. Yeah, click there.
Click, click, click. It's not going to work. Let me tell you what you would have seen. It seems in the last month I've had a few of these moments. The one at the left, tracer at 1.5 meters, you'll see it spread and get dilute, and then it will turn and flow down into the lower lake. That's the water body in the bottom right-hand corner. At the same time, the tracer deep down does the same sort of moving around, and it flows into the upper lake. So water from the same arm of the lake goes in 2 different ways. Each of those water bodies has very different characteristics. So this is part of the complexity. So you look at the lake, you drove here this morning, it was flat, calm, looks like nothing is happening. There's a lot happening even when it's calm, especially when it's calm. All right, I hope you enjoyed those animations. This is a conceptual model of Mercury that Tom Sekonic put together, and you can see it's complicated. And all those boxes and all those arrows show connections, some of which we know a lot about, many of which we know very little about. That's a very static model. A affects B, and B drives C and D. When you put that conceptual model in that moving framework of water going from one basin to another, exposed to different amounts of light and oxygen, it just gets a whole lot more complicated. And this is part of where we want to get to in the next 3 years, not specifically for Mercury, but for all the issues, for nutrients, for cyanobacteria, and the like. Okay, so I'm going to put our work is divided into two parts. Part is actual measurements out in the lake and in the watershed, and part of it is modeling. And it's one thing to be able to say, oh, we finally understand how the lake is working or the watershed is working. The next question is, well, what's going to happen in 10 years? You need that predictive capability, and that's what the modeling does. The measurements allow us to fine-tune and calibrate the models. Then we use them to answer questions that decision makers need to know, at least to have some confidence in what they're doing. So the lake measurement work plan, we're putting in instruments in the lake. They should be hopefully going in the next month. These are instruments similar to the produced data, similar to those squiggly lines, but more of them in each of the basins, and also measuring dissolved oxygen. So we'll actually know minute by minute how that dissolved oxygen is changing. Unless we know that, we're not sure what the chemistry of the lake is doing. We'll be taking monthly profiles, instruments that we drop through the water, and it measures the chlorophyll and the oxygen and the turbidity, a whole range of things. There'll be chemistry done, nutrient chemistry, measuring phytoplankton, the algae, identifying them, and how that changes through the season. We're also using autonomous vehicles, basically robots that will be cruising through the water, particularly during times of algal blooms, when we really want to know how these blooms are moving, what arms they're in, what the concentrations are. Because I know to many people here, the cyanobacterial blooms are a huge issue. What I've shown in gray there is something that really wasn't covered by our funding, mainly because the need for it has arisen in the last month. And this is this high-resolution mapping of the lake bottom. So as you all know, we had these tremendous fires, largest fires in California in the last 3 months. The watershed is primed for massive erosion. It's going to bring new sediment into the lake. It's going to change the bottom of the lake, which is actually very poorly known, the shape of the basin. And this fresh sediment is going to cover large parts of this organic rich sediment. So we're trying to take measurements to understand what's coming out. We're pretty much doing it in the dark without these measurements. So it's in gray there. This is something we're actively working with people in the community to see how we can pool resources to try to get that done, to map the lake now before the rains and the erosion happens, and then maybe map it again the following year or the year after to see how that's changed. I mean, this is very important to Clear Lake. It's a huge problem for the state, because the state and all its water bodies are facing increasing fires as we go forward. So this, the red dots are where we're showing tentatively have these instrument arrays, that vertical line happening. These are the same sites we used back in the 90s, so we're trying to build on the existing data set we have. The underwater robotics, that's what the instrument looks like. It can cruise back and forth across the lake for something like 1 to 2 weeks, day and night, storms and what have you. So we could all be having brunch in Davis and it's doing all the work. Okay, lake modeling work. Again, we're using a model, peer-reviewed model, but coincidentally, a model that was developed in the 1990s at Clear Lake. So it's sort of coming home. It's certainly advanced and changed since then. Weather stations, we need to install those unless there are some here that I don't know about. Again, the bathymetry, the shape of the bottom of the lake, unfunded, is something we do need. Climate change is an issue here, as it is everywhere. The work that Tom and myself and others did, that was 20 years ago. The climate here has changed. It changes a lot of biological processes and physical processes. Big question, number 5, external and internal nutrients. The external nutrients is what gets washed in down the streams from all land management, let's say, or fires. The internal nutrients is this chemistry, the oxygen depleted, and nutrients coming out of the bottom of the lake. What their relative magnitudes are is really a large unknown question. And what management actions can be taken? The model is being used to advise decision makers. So just on climate change, this is some work we did a few years ago for looking at 6 lakes in Northern California and Nevada. Clear Lake is the bottom right. This is showing just the rate of climate change between 1995 and I think it was 2008. Clear Lake was warming slower than the other lakes, but that's more a function of its shallowness rather than anything else. But it's happening. Watershed measurements. We've been working with DWR, planning on installing gauges. We're supplementing their gauges on the 3 main inputs to the lake at those stations. Basically, we're going to put continuous turbidity samplers there, measure temperature and turbidity, and also going to be doing additional nutrient sampling, trying to determine what the load is coming into the lakes. There has been questions about should we be doing continuous nutrient sampling as well. That could have some advantages, but again, that wasn't part of the proposal, and that's a very expensive undertaking. So currently unfunded. Complementary modeling of the watershed. There were the measurements, there's the modeling. We have a model that we've used very successfully at Lake Tahoe, looking to apply that here as well. The fires do have some benefits, and one is after it was the Valley Fire a couple of years ago. The whole watershed was flown by LiDAR, basically an aerial laser survey of the entire watershed, which is great. We have that data. From the point of view of this year's fires, it's giving us a before scenario. This is what the land was like. If we could, say next year or the year after, repeat that, we'll actually know on a basin-wide scale where the slumping took place, where the erosion took place. So it's more than just monitoring the stream. It gives you a way of knowing what's happening everywhere and what the problematic areas are. And this is sort of a picture that's familiar to many of you who live up here. This is just showing Clear Lake and then showing the burnt areas in relation to the lake. Collaboration, as I said at the outset, we view this as a collaborative process. We've already started talking with the RCD and DWR, the county, USGS and others. It's Carolyn Abrams has organized a meeting for October 24th where we hope to continue and establish new collaborations and the like. Collaboration will likely alter the work plan. So this is consider a Mark 1 work plan. We're open to suggestion. We're open to tying in with existing science programs that we're currently unaware of. And we have a number of faculty and staff and graduate students engaged. Okay, so this is why I go kind of wild. We can study, we can model, Jonathan's team can do their thing. my own personal view, this is my personal view, I haven't run this past my two collaborators there, as I think we need a new paradigm here. It isn't just a matter of controlling what's coming in. So I've been doing some work for the World Bank in the last year. So this is just take this not as a plan, but maybe the sort of thing that's worth thinking about. Okay, so what I've been doing for the World Bank relates to floating photovoltaics. Basically taking a lake or a reservoir, putting arrays of photovoltaics. Now I can see some people in the audience saying, oh my God, what is he? I should say I'm an engineer. We sometimes get a bad rap. Okay, you're familiar with this dam. This is Hoover Dam. Huge dam, great tourist attraction, generating capacity of 2,000 megawatts. If 1% of the surface of Clear Lake, 1%, 100, was covered in floating photovoltaics, you would more or less have the same generation capacity as Hoover Dam. So, calculations, 1950, it would be the world's largest floating photovoltaic array. Currently it's 1,500 megawatts. Suddenly, there's no project in the United States of this magnitude. We have a zero-emission, sustainable energy source. Part of that energy can be used for control. We're getting oxygen in the lake, controlling some of these nutrients. Cap and trade funds are there to help fund these sorts of things. The fact that it's so eutrophic means the lake is actually adding carbon to the atmosphere. So there are lots of benefits to something like this. So at least give it some consideration. And I think with that, I'm done.
That was great.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Before opening it up to questions, it'd be great just quickly to touch base on a couple of these points that Sarah Ryan had made. The first was in terms of overall schedule in your work plan. Do you have dates assigned and deliverables at this point? That's in my head.
It's okay, I can shout. Well, under contract with Fish and Wildlife, there are dates, but according to those dates, we would have been a lot further along now. So I think those dates are very rubbery. Some of these things that we have to actually put hard orders in for are there. So a lot of the installation of stream monitoring and lake monitoring stuff will hopefully happen in the next month. But I think the Department of Fish and Wildlife would be very amenable with us working with the community and the stakeholders here and modifying those dates and the scope as well.
And that kind of goes to the next question there of the degree to which a plan for working directly with this committee has been developed. I know I spoke briefly to your colleague Jonathan earlier about that, and it sounds like some subsequent discussions will be needed, but just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, this is the first meeting, so yeah, I think we will be working with the Blue Ribbon Committee, and I think just today is the beginning of that. I think it's a great committee and it represents a broad range of opinions and constituencies, and yeah, we would like to provide them with information that we think they need, and I'm sure they're very keen to provide us with information they're convinced we need as well. So I think it's the beginning of a very fruitful exchange.
Sarah, does that touch on your question?
There's no actual dates mentioned, but yeah, I think so.
So actual dates may shift. Any near-term deadlines? You mentioned a month or so to install some of those.
Yeah, I mean, they're not really deadlines. I mean, these are things that we hoped to actually have had in the lake several months ago, and they're not. And certainly if we can get the funding to allow for this mapping to occur, we really need to do that before the first rains cause erosion. We don't know when that will be, but we're working towards getting all that set up.
Thank you. So similar to what we did during the first presentation, I'd like to look to members of the committee for any questions, and then members of the public as well.
And I want to follow up, because I was slightly unnerved in that the contract's been issued, and it really directs what you're supposed to do for the science, and it sounds like there were adjustments going on, and I know, and you even talked about needing more funded, and so how are you going to manage what you plan to do within the existing funding? And, I'm nervous when somebody sort of says to a room full of people, I need more funding, where that's going to come from, or what that's going to screen out of your ability to do.
Well, the work plan we have and the deliverables are covered as far as the funding for people and equipment, the 3-year duration of the project. But that project, that initial project, that vision then was somewhat different. So as Supervisor Steele knows, part of what we wanted to do at the outset, a lot of it at his urging, was to use this watershed model to be able to say this activity in the watershed is producing this effect. Another one is producing a different effect, to give the county and others the ability to regulate land use on the basis of science. On account of the fire, you're not going to see the impact of land use. You're going to see the impact of a massive fire. So that underlying signal is gone for the next few years. So we're still going to be monitoring the streams, we're still going to be modeling the watershed, taking the same measurements, but if we want to characterize the impacts of the fire, that's when we're trying to work with people in the basin to see if there are more funds. I mean, we have the equipment needed to do this. It's just a matter of paying for the month of people time just to be able. This is a huge lake, and to say we're going to remap the bottom of it it physically takes 4 to 5 weeks out of the lake, let alone the processing after that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I mean, it
raises some more. I think the issue is I want to carefully manage expectations, and we have a fixed amount of money, and we have a task, and if it sort of spins out at some point, I don't want to take our eyes off of the original task, and if it's more, I want to discuss that in a way that we can understand it, but this process has to have value to people as it moves ahead, and it has to have money. So
if I could address that. So recently at Lake Tahoe, we, on account of the end of the drought and the very wet winter we had, there was some water quality changes happened at Lake Tahoe, and there were many questions as to why did this happen, what should we have measured, and the like, on top of the regular monitoring that was going on. So here, clearly, we have a plan for doing monitoring and scientific investigation to understand how the lake works, and that's going to happen, and it's starting to happen. What I'm wary of, based on this recent Tahoe experience, is somebody saying in 2 years or 3 years, what were the effects of that huge fire? What will the effects of the future fires be? How do we prepare for that? So that's what we're trying to do. I mean, if the community says, well, there's no more money, just make do with what you got. We have our hands full.
Well, it's not the community that's funding this.
Okay,
it's
sorry.
and the thing that I think is important, this is a teachable moment right at the beginning of the process. It's a good way to understand that we sort of, when we constantly change or we do that, it generates more, and people need to decide what's doable and what fits with a clear understanding of that. And then if there's more that's needed, we can talk about that, but sort of, you know, we haven't even done the first steps yet, and it makes me nervous. We're already talking about more, and yet in your defense, at the Tahoe discussion that was rather animated, the real issue there is how do you take the science and turn it to public action? And there were a few people in the room, I don't think it's anybody that's in this room right now, that would have loved for the science to just go on forever without turning it to some practical steps and understanding what those steps are. And I think that's the iterative process we have to have here, but people need to understand that if it's spinning out in a way that it costs them much more money to do it, well, that's a real decision.
Yeah, and I recognize that. But at the same time, it's not something you can say, well, let's do the first year's work, and next year we'll look at the effects, the pre-fire conditions, because the fires happen. If there's a decision to do something, it really has to come now. Unless, of course,
but
it's
I
a really
think that
challenge.
we're both talking about the same thing. We're not disagreeing. It's managing the expectations. And if the expectations are immediately set out that we need to do additional stuff because of that over and above what we've already contracted for, that might be a problem. And so we have to raise it to understand it and see if we need to address it, or if we need to address it, how to address it, rather than being halfway in and realizing we can't. But I didn't mean to be the only one that asked questions. Jeff.
Yeah, you know, I want to kind of pull us back in a little bit, because it isn't the fire so much as the surface area that's been disrupted. A lot of the suppression repair creates problem by itself. The suppression activity created problems. The fire itself is kind of natural in the landscape. We get a lot of fires. 103 fires prior to this year in the last 50 years. So we average 2 large fires per year. If you go back to 1991, 92, we had the Forks Fire. 83,000 acres and 45,000 acres of it was in the watershed for the lake. That was not monitored, that was a baseline. That actually could have produced a lot of understanding about what happens at the lake had we done the monitoring for that particular fire. And for the years after that, we had a lot of cyanobacteria blooms. Now we don't know how to anticipate where those blooms came from and what actually caused those blooms. And now we're getting out towards the opposite end of this, and we get another fire, whereas the lake actually repaired quite a bit over the years, from my observation going back to the heavy bloom period. And so I was always operating under the idea that the land use should be very carefully monitored, so we know where we have a problem and be able to craft a solution for that problem. And there's been a couple of very large projects that have come through Lake County, that is capture all the sewage, put it in a pipe, take it up to the geysers and dump it there. We've had a grading ordinance, and that has had some positive effect. Unfortunately, there's been no monitoring on either one of those. So the fire has been monitoring, the actions we've taken has been monitoring. Now we're going to have this large fire, which in fact, 470,000 acres produces 90,000 acres within the watershed. But on the other hand of that, with all of this potential for it to wash in, it only goes into certain streams. And those streams are fairly straightforward to monitor. You got Scotts Creek, you got the Middle Creek, you got the Clover Creek. That's going to take a lot of it. And then there's a little that's over into Kelsey Creek. So it's not as big as saying there needs to be a brand new budget, because we have Regional Water Quality Control Board will be doing a certain amount of monitoring. And then the Bear Committee, or the teams from BLM and National Forest Service will be doing some monitoring. So all of that could come together and form a coalition for monitoring. There certainly needs to be some automated monitoring that goes on, and I think that we can achieve that, maybe even under the present budget. So I'd like to see analysis of what we can achieve.
Yeah, what I was referring to was monitoring of the deposited sediment in the lake. So no, you're absolutely right. Multiple agencies are looking at what's happening in the streams and on the land. But when you're monitoring it, 3 or 4 or 5, any finite number of places in the watershed, you're just getting those points. The lake is an integrator of all that. And if there's only 3 inches of new sediment across half of the upper arm, that tells you, in a way, what you missed, as well as telling you how it's going to change the chemistry of the lake.
You know, we should have more discussions about this because it is a difference between the external loading and the internal loading, and you realize that, so we can have that discussion.
Yeah, this is our broad overview that is plunging. So who else has questions of the committee before we go? Yes, to the crowd.
Hello. I have a couple of questions. I saw one slide that you said that the data transfers SQL into BC Davis. One of the issues I think we've had here in the county is the broad number of agencies or entities that are doing monitoring, but that so much of that monitoring is, so much of that data is in multiple places and aren't looked at together. I know that UC Davis has, there have been Clear Lake water quality investigations in various decades that have pulled information together, but in terms of kind of the running information, it's difficult when entities are putting the data into a place that nobody else can access. And I sort of use it as a preface to say that, and you're probably aware of this by now, but one of the projects we did at Big Valley Rancheria is take all of the publicly available data through Department of Water Resources websites, irrigated ags reports, the California Department of Food and Ags reports, Superfund, tribal water data, and put it all in one location, which is on our website, so that we could look at the data from the 1960s to 2015, the water quality data that's there, all the different parameters. And one of the things we did notice is that the biggest collector of data over the years, of course, is Department of Water Resources. They had about 60,000 pieces of data for since 1960s, but Big Valley Rancheria had 20,000 pieces of data doing water monitoring since 1999. So there is so to hear that the data is being transferred to some sort of UC Davis database, concerns me just because we all live here, we all need this information to be doing land use management. I mean, I agree with you that that looking at this clearly, we should be able to identify land use management policies based on which activities are producing the impacts, the water quality impacts. So I would like to know whether, I'm assuming the contract says that you can do that, but I'd like to know if your data is going into any publicly accessible database, and also what have you done to look at the existing water quality data that's been collected more recently, like from the tribes or other agencies, that should be factored into the research that you're doing.
Okay, is our scribe actively working? Okay. All of the data that we collect will go into a SQL database, UC Davis, and is available to anybody who wants it. We will transfer the data to you. Now, we will be producing, on average, 60,000 data points a day. So a lot of data points, but yeah, that's right. Happy to share it, whether you want the raw data or processed data. We actually conducted a review of the DWR sampling program. I think that was done in 2012, so we're certainly aware of the DWR data and what it's showing and what was it designed to pick up. The tribal data, we haven't had an opportunity to look at that. I was hoping, I think most of you were going to that meeting on October 24th, so I'm going to be there as well, so maybe we could set up a time to meet that day or another day.
It is all in federal databases, by the way, the tribal database.
No, that's great. So it's just, we really want to know what people are doing, and not just the data you have, what your programs are. So we don't want to just, you have ongoing programs that we need to know. So we're not trying to sequester the data away.
Well, yes, that is my concern that, there's been a lot of money spent and time spent by the entities that are here, primarily the tribes, but, it shouldn't go to waste. It should be absolutely factored into this.
Questions from the audience? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just curious, on your long list of things to make Clear Lake so complex, you list an item that says it's impacted by Earth's rotation. Can you briefly explain what that's all about?
By what, sorry?
It's impacted by the Earth's rotation.
That's basically the way the water moves. So because we're on a spinning Earth, it actually changes the motion of the water. And if you don't take that into account in the models, it doesn't change the way you go out and collect the water sample. But in the models, it makes it more complicated. That's all.
So it actually creates like a current in the lake, is that what you're saying?
It impacts the currents. It deviates them one way or another. It creates a whole lot of deep waves. It's really don't want to go there. But I would, coffee and lunch, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. But it's one more, it just makes big lakes more interesting than small lakes sometimes.
I'm just wondering, the bar report is out on the Mendocino Fire Complex, so I think they have some good estimates on what they expect for sediment coming off of that. Also, in terms of first flush and ash coming into the lake, that's going to happen fairly quickly. And if you guys are set up to monitor some of that, I think that would be helpful also as an initial indication. And one other source of data, steal somebody's thunder over here, that hasn't been mentioned is I'm sure the Lake County Farm Bureau is doing some monitoring for the irrigated lands program, so they probably have some pretty good information and some inputs to the lake. And of course, as was mentioned, the tribal work has done a lot, and Jennifer with the Central Valley Water Board has, access to a lot of information there. So I think that collaborative and gathering that in one place, as Sarah alluded to, is going to be really helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Joan Moss. I'd like to know if you've already made the effort to contact Drs. Tom Sukanik and Dr. Pete Richardson, who were here from UC Davis in the past. They did a number of years of work, and if there's been an effort to coordinate and collaborate with the federal EPA, who is in charge of the Superfund toxic waste site at the Sulphur Bank mine. Thank you.
So Pete Richardson and Tom Sukanik were the people who actually invited me in to work at Clear Lake back in the 90s. And Dr. Sukanik, did you want to add anything to that? He's here today.
The answer is yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure how active Pete is these days.
Not on Clear Lake or science. Yeah. He's doing a different kind of science.
But he was acknowledged earlier in the meeting.
Good, thank you, I'm like, and how about that federal EPA?
The federal EPA, I know Tom has been working with them and keeping up with it, so we're hoping Tom will impart perspectives on EPA's current work and role history.
Maybe I'll make a short comment later on when the public is invited. Okay?
Other questions? We were way ahead of schedule and we just sort of lost it all in the so I want to keep moving here. Do you have a presentation tonight? Yeah, then we should get to that because we were supposed to take a break at 11:45.
Well, I'm not going to ask for any more money, so. All right. Take that clicker.
Great. All right, I'll see if I can do it from over here. If my glasses aren't quite strong enough, I'll walk to where Jeff was. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this process. I really appreciate the initial outreach from Assemblywoman Cecilia Aguiar-Curry, came to UC Davis and said, I've got this new paradigm, this audacious project around Clear Lake Clear, and can you give us some help? And we were so thrilled to be able to do that and join with my colleague Jeff Schledow and his group. As the Congressman Thompson said earlier, as we were just chatting about the important role of UC Davis as a land grant institution to really provide public benefit, that's in our charter, that's in our contract as a whole of the university. So we're happy to be able to put that into action. So I just want to say really briefly about our Center for Regional Change, which is partnering with Turk on this. We focus on the social, economic, political dimensions of community well-being and regional well-being. We have a wide variety of topical areas, as you can see here. And we put social equity in the center of what we do. So we really think about disparities, about who is having access to resources and opportunities, who is being subject to the negative externalities or the negative impacts of these different systems, and who's included in decision making. So all of the work that we'll be doing here is based on those kinds of values, and that will involve active collaboration with the Blue Ribbon Committee, with individual members, broader stakeholders, and as was mentioned, we'll have one meeting coming up in just a few weeks in which we're going to be talking with local stakeholders and some members of the committee as well, and that's just the beginning of it. We're looking forward to really seeing this next 3 years and past that as a community collaborative process that doesn't begin or end in any one contract. So our overall objective here is to help inform the Blue Ribbon Committee and I would say the broader community to identify priorities for funding and for investments to be able to, as Assemblywoman said, promote the rehabilitation of both the lake and the community and the local economy. So really want to be that research partner that can help raise key questions and help answer as many of those as possible, and to really engage in a mutual learning process. Just really briefly, and it's been mentioned before, but there are a number of different community engagement processes happening. They all fit together, but just wanted to point out that there's work that our colleagues Sacramento State are doing and as facilitating this committee, and background work that they'll do. The Ohio Environmental Research Center has begun reaching out to a number of stakeholders, will be part of our process as well, but will have its own logic to it and its own timeline. And then our group, CRC, is doing community engagement not as in a service role as Sac State is doing, but to inform the kind of social economic analysis that we're doing. So there will be different kinds of calls for input, and I just want to be clear that they all connect, but there is some distinction as well. So the three things that our group are going to be involved with are a social economic analysis of Lake County and more specifically the Clear Lake region, develop a process to help develop a community economic strategy, and we'll talk about a little bit that's not about creating a strategic plan, it's about facilitating a strategic planning process and really a strategic doing process, so that this is about moving towards action, not just creating yet another plan that sits on a shelf. And then, as I mentioned, a community engagement strategy helping to inform what we're doing. And I love the idea, as Sarah Ryan was just saying, about making sure that data is staying here in the community, and to kind of think about, is there a data clearinghouse, is there some sort of data dashboard that can be used? So we're interested in those kinds of ideas. So the first part on the socioeconomic analysis, we have developed an index, and I'll show you an image of that in a moment, called the Regional Opportunity Index. and it's a holistic measure of opportunity and disparities on a wide variety of indicators: health, housing, economy, education, environment, transportation, land use, and others. Because as you know, and as everyone knows, we don't just not just affected by one of those factors at a time. We're affected by all of that, and the community that is vital and is sustainable and healthy is one in which all those systems are working well in and of themselves, and they're well integrated. So this index looks at all of those different factors in a holistic way, but we'll also be able to break those out. So we'll be looking at basic demographics, economic vitality, the economic flows of resources here, the business climate, the housing, both in terms of affordability and quality, the health in both physical and mental health, the different kinds of social capital, the social relationships and the organizational infrastructure of the community, and issues of public safety. And just to really point out that although the legislation is talking about jobs and economic vitality, we really understand that if you just think about what makes a vital economy, what makes even a vital company, you have to think about the labor there. What are the kinds of stressors that they're under? Do they have good housing? Do they have a good place to send their kids to school? Is it a community that they want to stay in versus sort of leaving the community as human capital is built? Is it actually staying in place? Are people healthy to be able to be fully productive? So we really need to think about this in a comprehensive way. So these kinds of data can help develop that kind of larger picture. So we'll also be doing primary data collection, so talking to people. We think that people's stories and experiences are as important as the secondary data, and so we'll be trying to integrate those together. So this is just one screenshot of the Regional Opportunity Index. It's online. We can give you a URL to go to it. So it's all publicly available data. You can download it. You can map it yourself. You can also interact with it on this site. So generally, the color scheme is that red areas have lower levels of opportunity across all of those different domains that I mentioned: health, housing, economy, and so on. And green have the highest levels of opportunity, and these are relative to the state as a whole. So this is the Clear Lake region. There's a small circle or area indicated in the top left, and that's the Upper Lake area where we are. So on the left is the attributes of individuals. So this is looking at economic opportunity. So it's about, this has poverty and employment on it. And on the right is place opportunity. So that's about the infrastructure that's in the ground. So it's looking at the business climate, access to banks, the location of high quality jobs. So you need to have both the individual human capital of the people, and you need to really also have a vital economy and an infrastructure that can support that. So this is just one small example of the kind of analysis that we'll do. So the second is the Community Economic Development Strategy, or as our colleague Keith Taylor, who's a Cooperative Extension Economic Development Specialist, will talk about this idea of strategic doing. So that will involve first an asset mapping process to really understand what are the physical, human, social assets in the place. And it's this idea of asset-based community development, or ABCD. The idea is that you can't build on growth. So the idea is that if you just focus on the problems in a community, it's very difficult to actually figure out what do we do. We can kind of go down that rabbit hole of more and more and more research and know more and more and more about the problems, but that's not going to get us to, well, how do we actually rehabilitate, how do we build towards healthy communities? So that asset mapping is a really crucial first part of any kind of strategic planning. There'll also be a series of participatory sessions where key stakeholders from across the across the county, across the region, will be able to get together, look at those assets, identify the key goals of what is a healthy economy, what is a healthy community, identify the kinds of pathways that they need to do to move from those assets to those kinds of goal end states. And then they'll be using that kind of information, and these will happen sort of in quick succession, sort of quarterly meetings where people can look at data quickly and make some key decisions and identify pathways. Using that kind of information, they'll develop an actual plan. That those will be brought to the Blue Ribbon Committee. And on your question, Sarah, in our contract, there are annual reports to the committee, but we're really happy, I speak for ourselves, the CRC, really happy to be able to come to quarterly meetings and share what we have. I can't promise we'll have sort of polished reports for each of those quarterly meetings, but we're certainly happy to share where we are in the process. And then there'll be, as a third part, an active community and tribal engagement strategy, talking about those idea of assets. This is a rich community in so many different ways, in terms of the commitment of people to place, in terms of the political support that you have, some represented here on the committee and here in the audience. The thousands of years of experience and expertise from the tribes in the region, now the alignment of state and federal agencies. So there are incredible riches here, and it's important that as we do our work, we're really aligned with drawing from those kinds of information bases, developing or building on the strategies that have already been built here, so we're not reinventing the wheel. So that's the key part of that engagement strategy. So in terms of our timeline, we've begun community engagement. We've had to reschedule a number of different trips up here in respect for people dealing with the immediacy of the fires, but we've had a number of consultations on the phone. We'll have this initial site visit with all of our faculty, and I'll introduce those via slides in a moment, in late October, and then develop a plan going on from there, active stakeholder engagement. We'll have the progress reports, as I mentioned, and the final report at the end of the 3 years. But sitting here, I really am intrigued by this idea of some sort of clearinghouse, some sort of dashboard that again, as reports, as data are generated, they can be made accessible. So just to give you a sense of who will be interacting with you, so we have 5 different faculty. Ann Visser is an associate professor and in community and regional development, and she'll be focusing on tribal engagement. She's Native American herself. There's another project that I'll show you, kind of a diagram of the different projects that the CRC is involved in addition to this. So one of them is youth engagement work that Dr. Nancy Erbstein directs. We'll have Noli Brazil, who's a demographer dealing with developing the social economic analysis and the demographic reports. We'll be really trying to learn as we go and develop this as sort of an adaptive management process. So it's really important to have evaluation built in. So, if we think about this is kind of a bold experiment here. As you were saying, Secretary, we've looked at Tahoe, we've looked at the Salton Sea. This is smaller in geographic scale, perhaps, but it's complicated, as Jeff was saying. So we really have an opportunity to learn a lot about how to do regional ecological and economic planning at the same time in an integrated way. And so we really want to understand that as it goes, and then help tell the story, so that can be used in other regions of the state and other regions of the country. So that's Vikram Pundinya, who's a specialist in evaluation. Keith Taylor, I mentioned, is a specialist in community economic development, and joined by Claire Cannon, who is here, actually, who is a sociologist, focuses on a wide variety of analysis of environmental equity, social inclusion, and public health. So they'll be working on the economic development from that kind of holistic view, thinking not just about dollars and cents, but also what makes a healthy community. And then we've got our project staff with the Center for Regional Change, including myself. Bernadette Austin, who is our associate director, was on the agenda today, was not able to join us. Carolyn Abrams, who is here, has been, and she's been in phone contact with many of you. And we've got people who have expertise in community engagement and GIS mapping as well. So finally, I just wanted to show a graphic about the range of different kinds of projects that the CRC is involved with here, because you may be interacting with us in a couple different contexts, and so I want to just give you a sense that we have a couple different hats. So at the top is the Clear Lake process that we're talking about today. We also have a class, and we had the assembly member there, fortunately, yesterday. It's on community change organizations. So they're going to be looking particularly at some of the social dimensions of well-being in the region, particularly the continuum of care, looking at homelessness and housing and social welfare. So we'll have some students up here, and we'll have some of our faculty as well. There's a strand of work on youth engagement that, as I mentioned, Nancy Erbstein is running. And then we're finishing up the first phase of a project looking at access to clean and safe drinking water in the larger West Side Integrated Regional Water Management area, West Side Irwin, and that will be coming out, and we've been glad to work with Will on that as well. So those are the sort of range of activities. Whoops, I didn't want to turn that off. So with that, I will open it up to comments, and I think Sam, you'll facilitate that, or Secretary.
What, are there questions from committee members? Yes.
I don't know if I have notes on it, but the mapping that had the different colors that were showing access to housing, how do you, and I know we read that other meeting,
yeah, right.
How do you, are you integrating the Calenviro screen or some of the other indicators that are being used statewide for health?
Yeah, so we're using source data that's similar to the Calenviro screen for the environmental component of the opportunity index, as well as health data. Well, a lot of the data actually in Calenviro screen is also in ours. Theirs, as you know very well, is focused on environmental, and we have this much more holistic view. But we're drawing on health records. We're drawing on EPA data on air quality. We have a drinking water indicator. That's the same one that we has developed for Calenviro screen. So
and just for the record, you two understand what Calenviro screen is,
yeah.
but I'm looking at the crowd and
Right.
see some people scratch their heads.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain very briefly what it is so they know what you're talking about?
Yes, yeah, thank you. And yeah, there's a lot of acronyms and a lot of terms of art. So the Calenviro screen, or California Environmental Screen, is used by the California EPA, and there's a particular office within it called the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And they've developed this tool that, similar to our Opportunity Index, looks holistically at environmental quality as well as social well-being. And they're using it now actually for a wide variety of things. Originally, it kind of keeps growing, but there's the use of it to identify disadvantaged communities to get access to a greenhouse gas reduction fund or cap and trade funds. But it's also being used to identify priority areas for enforcement, for permitting. Right? And we have someone from the Department of Toxic Substances Control. So DTSC is using it to work on their permitting and monitoring of hazardous waste sites and other things. So
thank you.
Super
right here. Super right.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything you've said and applaud the approach. I was listening for one thing I didn't hear, so this is just an additional comment. The 35 rural counties, each one identifies with certain things that have to do with natural attributes, and those natural attributes, including the chance for highway transportation, corridors, that sort of thing, on top of those other natural attributes. those really shape the counties across the 35 rural counties. This actually limits them or allows them to expand, that sort of thing. We're in a unique situation with the surrounding counties being much richer than we are, and we have some distance in time away from them, and we have a very large lake in the center of our county, which shapes what we do and what we can do and what actually can't happen, otherwise we'll spoil our lake. So from my standpoint, I would like to see the rural county identity actually explain the attributes of it so that when we're moving forward, it's in that context.
Yeah.
And then when we advertise for changes, we actually do it so we don't spoil something. Simply one thing, taking the place of where we should go simply because we haven't considered it. You could put that in the background of your thoughts.
Thank you. That's a great point, and it relates at least a little bit to the idea of identifying the assets and building on those, but also thinking about constraints and risks, as you say, of certain kinds of developmental paths could actually degrade the resources that comprise some of the assets of the place. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Questions from the crowd at all? There's one right there.
I can just stand.
Why don't you take that?
Okay. I just have a quick question. I got a little confused about the money breakdown. So you talked about $5 million, and how does it break down in terms of the scientific research and also London's part of it?
So I'll say a little bit about that, but it probably could be addressed by the secretary more broadly. So that $5 million, for example, and probably.
Once you pass the microphone back.
Yeah, okay. The $5 million that was mentioned in Prop 68, that's for programs on the ground. That's separate from the funding, the $2 million to UC Davis. The $15 million that was also mentioned is for on-the-ground restoration and rehabilitation, things like that. So again, separate from ours. And any additional funds that are, secured by this committee or identified by the committee to as priorities, yet again, will be for on-the-ground work. Our piece is just that locked-in initial investment.
Good. Just want to be sure there was enough money.
Well, I don't know if there's enough money, but
Well, that was
distinguished.
the subject of an animated discussion. And I think just to go back to my original comments, for 4 years, we couldn't get any money. And so that's why I was having a heart attack when we finally got money and somebody wanted to spend more. And I think the $2 million is a breakthrough, and the money for what's on the ground is significant, but that's a lot of times where additional money is for actual projects on the ground. And our bonds have moved, with the possible exception of one that's on the ballot right now, have moved away from earmarks into competitive grant processes so that you actually demonstrate that you're going to produce against the goals in the bonds, particularly the water bond. And so, but Prop 68 as well, so that there are regulations and you have to demonstrate how you bring things back with watershed improvement or how you actually provide water so that we're actually funding the outcomes in a clear way rather than just an earmark. So the important thing about this process is that if it moves along at a pace that identifies some of these things, then it could be eligible for some bond funds in certain processes that exist. But that was another reason why I was worried that the process would take long and the bond funds would start to go out the door to people that are ready. And so I just want to make sure time-wise that was integrated Other questions? Then I think we were going to take a 10-minute break, but you were going to mention that if somebody wants to speak in public comment, there's a process for them submitting a card, right?
Yeah, maybe we can just get a quick show of hands. Towards the end of the meeting, we're planning on having a general public comment session where you can ask questions of the committee members or any of the staff here. Just a quick show of hands, who's interested in delivering a general public comment? 1, 2. We're in great shape. If you did fill out one of these cards, if you could just hand those in to me, those maybe we take a 5-minute break. Get out and stretch your legs a little bit before we come back.
If we take a 5-minute break, we get 10-minute breaks.
That's what I said.
When I announced 10, that would be 20. So let's take a 5-minute break, and we can go later than 10 minutes.
Okay, do we have all the, there, okay, great. So Sam already spoke about this in a general sense, and now we're going to just go through a bit more discussion, really in some ways sort of open up the first kind of discussion topic for you as a committee. To briefly reiterate the rationale, not to advocate, I want to be very clear about that because I know from some discussions Sam's already had their different perspectives. We have found in our work that on cases like this, where there are very significant environmental and social challenges, it is highly likely that several of you, by virtue of already knowing each other and by virtue of having been living and working in this basin, that you already are of a shared mind and a shared awareness. It is also potential that even with that shared knowledge, there are nonetheless still unique ideas that some of you all would have, unique perspectives, even about perhaps the same location in the watershed or things like that. And then the added extra bonus is that notwithstanding the fact that, again, several of you, if not all of you, do know each other in some ways, you have not yet worked as a committee. This is you're embarking into a new format of how working together. And with all that as a backdrop, we have found through a variety of different landscape scale type projects that we facilitate that this idea of a site visit is of benefit. You go out, you kick the dirt, you sort of treat it like a whistle stop tour, so to speak. We do a lot of the background, get a lot of background information. So that's the rationale. What we wanted to do now was open up the discussion amongst you and to see what ideas you had about that. We know that this is not your day job, and any demands that come from this committee are time consuming. We want to try to accommodate the fact that something like that does normally take a good chunk of a day in reality. Does not preclude doing that during a part of a day and then coming and concluding in a committee meeting. Wouldn't necessarily preclude doing a site visit one whole day and then the next morning or something like that, getting together, doing a committee meeting. There's lots of different options. We commonly, again, when we're doing something like this, look to do this early on in the process, so that's what we were recommending that it would be at the next meeting. But again, all that said, you may very well likely come back as a committee and say, this is just not something we want to do and we not do it at all, or logistically, let's put it off to some other later in time. So with all that as a backdrop, I want to open up the floor and look to you as community members, and if we just sort of do the hands up. I think we need to mess with the table tents. Sam's going to do note-taking, Sophie's doing note-taking. So what are thoughts that you have about whether we should do something like, again, a half day, full day site visits, again, go out, see different things from your different perspectives, and then what might be those locations? What would be the things you would want your other committee members to take a look at? And what I'd like to do right now is just sort of brainstorm on the ideas. We can then move to the, okay, let's get some ideas, and now let's look at, is this even a good enough idea to do? But if you've just got ideas about places to go, let's start with that. So any initial thoughts that folks have, Sarah?
Well, I think that there are a lot of thoughts about land uses and their impacts on Clear Lake. So, we have agricultural areas, we've got areas where gravel mining is still occurring. There aren't a lot of monitoring locations where these ag areas are, where these gravel mining operations are, some of the other land uses. And I think it would be extremely helpful to get a sense of that, what is out there in terms of land use, look at the maps that are already there, and I know they've been produced. And before we just kind of go traveling all over the place to identify these areas that should be visited based on, being representative of the different land uses and problem areas that we're already aware of. So I think it would make sense to have that review first, kind of in-house or at a meeting or subcommittee or whatever, and then choose some locations beyond after that. We probably all have our favorite areas, but there is data that showing high phosphorus loading or sediment loading out of Middle Creek. I mean, we have some areas that we think, but it would be good to just take a step back, look at the maps, look at the data, and before everything is chosen. That's my opinion.
Right. Excellent. Other ideas? We go to Harry and then to Jim.
Two scientific words for a field trip are literal and riparian. And the land use is very important, and then what gets impacted by the land use is what I would mention next. Principally, littoral, think about the reclamation area, of course, and then for riparian, the major streams that Dr. Schladow and his teams are going to look at, Scotts and Kelsey.
Let me ask a quick question just to Sarah before I move on to Jim. On the different type of land use areas, would there be benefit? I mean, as far as I know, there's not any comprehensive land use monitoring network that exists. I mean, like literally a physical monitoring network, right? I mean, there are land use areas that would be representative areas of what I hear you talking about, but then there's no place we would necessarily go to where we would start really seeing where monitoring networks currently exist.
What do you mean by monitoring?
Well, just somehow sort of monitoring locations that are sort of all being networked together and tied together, as far as I know.
There's stream gauges. There are PM 2.5 monitoring. I mean, the information is there. We can just pull it together to see. But in terms of kind of the broader.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Probably my two terms would be emergent and wetland. And the emergent vegetation around the lake has disappeared by about 70% or more over time, and that needs to be appreciated by the committee. The wetland, of course, we have the restoration area. We want to look at how that's going to be used. That's our keystone for, that's about 70% of what we think is the sediment input to the lake, and we want the committee to see that. And then talk about the future plans, because that's going to be a big economics thing for whatever we do in the future. And then finally, I would like to see the committee look at some of what we call the paper subdivision lands, where we have off-road vehicle use, which is not controlled, and that creates a tremendous loading in the lake that's ongoing. And all the time we have off-road vehicle parks, at least one that is certified on BLM land, and we'd like to see what comes off of that. So off-road use is a big issue. With all of that, it would be great if the committee got an idea of what the burn areas were, because that's 90,000 acres, and that would be important.
I'm glad you raised it. I was going to ask the question about the burn areas. So other ideas that would be woven into a site visit, Jennifer, were you? See, think of me as any facilitator is a little like an auctioneer, and if you make any random move, we think that means you want to say something. So.
I was gonna raise the burn areas as well.
All right. Other thoughts from introduction?
It sounds, and kind of listening to some of the other committee member thoughts, that we could maybe even limit by geographical area. At first, it sounds like the Middle Creek watershed would be a good place to start, because it has burn, that has ag uses, that has off-road vehicle uses, that has the restoration project, it has wetland, it kind of has all what we're looking for. That might help kind of confine us to a geographical area, so we have somewhere to start. Just my thoughts on that.
Great. Excellent, thank you. And again, this, along the lines of what Sam had spoken about, again, as an idea, a process idea, the idea of subcommittees, and again, this just solely comes from our past experience, doesn't mean it's going to be applicable here, but something, site visits can be parsed out over time too, right? It doesn't have to be all done in one spot, and the idea of subcommittees could then ultimately weave into that. You can start getting more topic specific and then weave that into site visits. So there's lots of different ways to handle this. From a tribal
well, no, that speaks to what I was going to say a little bit, because there are a few of us, and I'll have a time issue, maybe somebody in my staff can come. But there are a few of us that are from outside or don't live with this every single minute of every day, and it would really be good to make sure people get to something that they don't know. If we're taking people that live in a neighborhood into their neighborhood, unless they're telling firsthand story to a bunch of people that don't live in the neighborhood, I would just be nervous about what purpose that serves. But for those of us that aren't here, or people that are on the committee that aren't here, it's like, what really educates them, whether it's the Burn Star for one particular watershed, or something that drives to what Jim was talking about. So that's the thing. I would like to just make sure people go to some place where they're learning.
Absolutely, that is an absolute embedded goal, so you're absolutely on money. From a tribal perspective, are there cultural dynamics or TEK kind of conditions that would be of benefit to look into?
I know for us, we have a project already on Middle Creek that most people don't know about. We've created buffers to catch sediment, to help with water quality. And we teamed up with Mendocino National Forest to do these things. And that's why I totally agree with about Middle Creek. You know, I think we have in that area of Middle Creek, we have cultural resources that we protect. We have cultural sites that we also use these buffers to protect. So I would say yes, Middle Creek.
One of the things that we can start doing, but that we have to be careful about, frankly, is, as Sam mentioned, we'll start working in the stakeholder assessment, the interviews, and collecting information. We can start diving into this question more, but we wanted to just take opportunity today to immediately start doing it. The limitations of Ag King, which are both a benefit for the public because it confirms that all discussions and all decision making is transparent. But that means that all decision making needs to be transparent. So what we can do and what we'll need to do is work with you all as to the point, like say Sarah, that you made about it would be great to look at some things first. I want to kind of put a question back to you here in a minute. If we go around individually interviewing you and talk, which we will, and dive further into this, we either need to know that you've got some comfort level at us trying to put together a proposed site visit to start moving with, because we can't make the decision. It's called a serial meeting. We can't like talk to several of you and then make a decision and then procedurally run the risk of doing that. Sarah, I want to look to you that if we, because of the point that you made about sort of, having some initial discussion and then come back, and what I'm about to propose would preclude that. But if we went along the lines of what Linda and Brenna said, that if we were to even just to do a starter on Mill Creek as a starter place to go to, would that be sufficient as a starting place? I see, Coral, you're shaking your head yes, but I wanted to check in with you. It's not to preclude the other things you'd said, I just want to check in with you.
I agree with Brenna that there's a lot going on there that would be useful, but so of course we couldn't not do a field trip.
Again, we as a facilitation team, this gets into the dynamic. We have to build with you a relationship and trust eventually, and then have a little bit of latitude to talk to you, and then sort of make some proposals, and not have it look like a serial meeting, and not have it be a serial meeting. Other ideas. So Sam has been writing it. Other thoughts of particular places.
One thing, I think either myself or the people that are staffing as well would be happy to consult when you do that,
right,
in a way to not have it be a serial meeting, but give you some guidance based on what people said in this meeting that you're heading in the right direction. So I don't want the process to bog us down. Exactly. And the other thing is I also picked up an inference about Ag McKean that if it turns out that the majority of us are on the tour, we'll notice that as a meeting, we'll invite any member of the public to come along, we'll do whatever it is that allows us to take it within the law. So we'll figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a number of these types of examples where we've done just that, and it is fully noticed, and there's nothing exclusionary about it. But just the decision making, like you said, it's the double-edged sort of it. So other ideas that perhaps haven't been raised about site, we clearly have some direction here, to be thinking about Middle Creek as a unified location to go and start looking at some things. And I think that, so let me move on to.
But your comment also that this is a long process and we will adjust as per when we start to get science and other things. It might point other places we need to see. I think this is the right start with the understanding that this is a longer process and other things might present themselves.
Right. Yeah.
One other place is, because we've got 5 years of cyanobacteria bloom data, phycocyanin data, and toxin data that the tribes have collected, that it would be good to also go to sites, to shorelines where we are more upstream of where the blooms are heaviest. And we definitely have that information. And there's also the satellite imagery that we have access to from NOAA.
What I'd like to propose then for expediency for today is, I know that we need to be pinning down the date of the next meeting. If we were, let me just sort of take a question, if we were to try to put something together that, as has been proposed, was focusing on the Middle Creek type of a footprint, maybe as well, Sarah, the cyanobacteria that you were just talking about, if there's some, nearby adjacent as opposed to on the complete other side of the lake.
The other side.
It would be the other side, of course. We'll let a helicopter take us over. If we were trying to aim for something like that, wherein we were consolidating this into a single day event, then so we would be consolidated to a single, sub-watershed that would allow for field visit work and then culminating with a commission or committee meeting. Would that sound generally achievable? And then again, as the secretary has pointed out, there's ample time for future, but that would get us starting, it would get us out in the field, we could start seeing representative examples, and we could do that fairly quickly, even within this calendar year, ideally. So anybody opposed, and again, I'm not saying we're going to be able to do that, because everybody's schedules, but if we started focusing in that direction, anybody opposed to that, just on a straw poll amongst you? Okay, great. Sam, anything else you think that I missed in terms of just getting some initial guidance?
Well, just on the scheduling point, I know that there was a pretty wide variety of opinions on when that next meeting should happen. There was, at least from my conversations with all of you, kind of a clear desire to get things moving as quickly as possible here. So, to the extent we can do it this year, I think we'll really push for that. But offline, just because scheduling by committee never works in my opinion. We'll be contacting all of you offline to do just a quick scheduling poll. And in addition to that, we want to get the interview discussion scheduled and line up with Supervisor Steele. I know you mentioned we might want to have some additional time for the conversations. We want to get the ball rolling on all that sort of thing, too. That doesn't necessarily take a meeting.
Okay, so I think that gives us the guidance that we need to get going, and we'll be launching ASAP. So, Secretary.
Thank you very much. That was remarkably more efficient than it was. So that brings us to public comment. You have 2 cards.
Yes.
Just going to take them in the order. The first one is Amanda James, and on deck is Tom. So, and we had suggested 2 minutes, but given the time, it could take 3 or 4 if you really wrapped up.
Hi, my name is Amanda James. I'm the BLM High Field Manager. Hello? Okay, I'll do that again. My name is Amanda James. I'm the BLM Ukiah Field Manager, and I'm just here today to share some information about our bear team assessments and emergency stabilization plans we have for the Mendocino complex fires. My field office was heavily impacted this summer. We burned close to 80,000 acres of BLM lands that we manage in this area. One of our most heavily impacted areas is on Cow Mountain. That's just west of here. There was about 30,000 acres of BLM land burned in our congressionally designated OHV area. And so We have a website developed with information for the public, and I have a flyer with information on how to access that website and what you may find there. I also have a handout of the Bear Team's watershed assessment. They focus mostly on Morrison Creek, Scotts Creek, and Mill Creek drainage, and so that is available. And I am here if anyone has any additional questions on what we're planning for emergency stabilization over the next year. But I just want to get the word out. It's not well known that these assessments were completed and this information is available. Thank
So,
you.
can you put those maybe on the table outside if anybody wants to grab one on their way out?
Thank you very much. And I think Sam just said you were going to try to put those on the table outside. Great. Tom?
Hi, my name is Tom Sukonic from UC Davis.
Turn it on. I think it's good.
How's that?
You have your hand right over where it is, so you could have just turned it back.
Hello. I just turned it on. Hello. Okay. I won't move my hand.
Hold it by the bottom.
Okay, Tom Sukonic from UC Davis. I just wanted to address Sarah's questions about data and historical data. I started some of the projects, the early projects, both on the cyanobacteria in Clear Lake as well as the mercury contamination back in the 80s and 90s. I was the director of the Clear Lake Environmental Research Center, the original one, located in Lakeport. And we had a 10-year run with the U.S. EPA Superfund program, which we had $1 million a year for 10 years. That's probably the biggest funded project that was out there. And we created huge numbers of, we probably had hundreds of thousands of data points on that project, which are primarily compiled in this dedicated issue of Ecological Applications, which is a high-end journal, peer-reviewed. And within each one, and there's 17 different projects and papers in here, which have within them all the references for the previous work that was done on all those projects. So I just want you to be aware that they're in there. There's lots of data available. Jeff Schlato and his team were involved in several of those projects, so he's well aware of that. But just for the sake of the committee, there's lots of data available, and I'm happy to help rack my brain in some of the historical stuff. So that's all.
John, before you go,
yes.
This is volume.
I can send anybody the links for all of these are on my website as well as in the Ecological Applications website. So it's December 2008, volume 18, number 8, supplement Ecological Applications.
And Sam, you could just somehow, in the course of something that gets sent out, include those links so that they would just come out to everybody.
Yeah. If we could just touch base so we can get that to
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for all your work over the years, too. Appreciate it. Seeing no more cards and no more business, we're at the end of the meeting, but we're ending a few minutes early, so I would just suggest if you had additional questions or comments that you wanted with people, you could use the time in the room to ask them. And then as was just described, it'll be clear to us when the next meeting is and whether a field trip is attached to it. So thank you very much. Yes. If it's brief.
I just wanted to update the committee on grant funding that is being awarded to Resource Conservation District through State Water Board for $604,000 to pay for BMP's best management practices for post-fire, and that's going to be implemented through Lake County RCD. They adopted a resolution yesterday to take that on, and so that's going to do areas in the Middle Creek, Scotts Creek, and Manning Creek watersheds. And BMPs will include spreading straw mulch, cleaning or repairing damaged culverts, and other actions to reduce sediment transport, and that work should begin soon. We're also in the process of trying to get funding for water quality monitoring to take place in surrounding watersheds, which will be coordinated with the tribes.
Well, great, thank you. And if you need more, Tom?
Just had one more, I forgot to ask a question. I missed the beginning of the discussion about visitation sites, and I'm wondering if the committee or the group would be interested in visiting the Superfund sites, because I know it's pretty much closed off to the public, and I'm not sure how many of the community or the committee have been there, but it's an interesting site and might be valuable since it's one of the highest, most significant contaminants of the lake.
I think it came up in passing in the discussion.
I didn't see it on the
But I
board, so-
see that Sam wrote it down, and you offered yourself as a resource, and I think he'll be in touch with you about that.
John, I can,
Yes.
yeah, assist on that, access to Silver Bank Line, is a stakeholder within that, but probably, I would say that then next year would be the best time to go in, and just because of where we're at with the reviewing the alternatives and coming up with a remediation plan. Maybe by that point, we'll be able to actually have a proposed plan to be able to discuss while we're on the visit too, but yeah, definitely,
Well,
I agree, it's the highest mercury loader, it's
I
in the
think
highest mercury.
Sam can talk to you offline about what next year means
Yeah.
in terms of the specific time, so he
Right.
knows how to integrate that.
I
Yes.
just want to throw out another idea. If we were using that as a separate field trip, I think that there are other land use impacts in that general area we could look at, including Cedar Lake Road and some other areas up in the hills. So I'm kind of thinking maybe a separate day that we, look at that part of the county.
Right, because you have the keys, which
Yeah.
is another issue,
Yeah.
and it is a high toxin area for cyanotoxins, so that could also be visited at that point, along with drinking water and the exposure to that with cyanotoxins.
Right. I'm a former mayor of Santa Cruz, and in Santa Cruz meetings never really end. It's my life's passing in front of me. So, but with that, I think the meeting really is ending, and there's a chance to talk to people in the next few minutes if you have an unaddressed issue. Thank you. I think this went very well.